Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Julie.
We're the hosts of the Hartford Fund's Human-Centric Investing Podcast.
Every other week, we're talking with inspiring thought leaders to hear their best ideas for how you can transform your relationships with your clients.
Let's go.
Welcome to the Human-Centric Investing Podcast, JT. We're so excited to have you here with us again today.
Julie, thanks for having me as always. Love it.
You know, JT, it seems like, first of all, Happy New Year. It seems like for the past 2 years, every time we've talked to you, Julie and I have asked you, so JT, what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen with the presidency? How about Congress? All this kind of thing. It's now happened. It's January. We know the results of the election. And so now our questions are not about the next election yet. That'll come soon enough. But it's what happens now, right? So we know you're in DC, you're kind of in the mix, kind of observing all this. How should financial professionals be thinking about what happens next? Let's say, well, gosh, do we even have to wait till January 20th? It seems like things are already happening. But so get out your crystal ball, JT. What happens next?
Yeah, that's it. I'm going to try to find a crystal ball that I had 4 years ago. Just started to dust that one off, and it just for everyone from an expectation standpoint, there's just a lot is going to happen. I mean, let's just be prepared for that. It is going to be drinking from a fire hose once again, and I don't think we're used to that. It's been a lot has happened in the past 4 years, and Donald Trump has not really left the scene. The Biden presidency has been, what's the best word? I don't want to say lethargic, but it's going to look lethargic compared to the next 4 years. So if you just go back to the first 4 years, there are going to be tweets, there are going to be statements, proclamations, there are the taunts, just a lot of stuff being thrown at us. And I just encourage everyone not to overreact when they see something. There is a method to the madness, and that's not, I'm not trying to be too critical here, but there is a method to Trump's madness. And he'll get results at the end of the day. And some people will be happy with those results and some people won't. But I think from a market standpoint, everybody tends to overreact. And we're seeing that already in some cases. But the markets and the pundits, if you will, tend to overreact. We just sort of need to keep our sanity here. And at the end of the day, the debate taking place on Capitol Hill right now, John and Julie, is all about whether we have one legislative vehicle, and I know we'll get to that in a second, or two legislative vehicles. Trump said it himself in the past 24 hours, I don't care what it takes. At the end of the day, it's going to be about policy passing. And that's what we're going to be looking at.
So we talked about the first 100 days and so much happening. And for those listeners taking notes, let's start building that laundry list. Could you talk to us about some of those specific things that we're probably going to see so that they can take notes and start setting their expectations accordingly?
Yeah, the first 100 days is going to start on day one, on January 20th. And I kind of pegged it, January 20th. And these are markers. Again, these are sort of, it feels to me as if they're these artificial media markers, but we have to abide by them because the Congress and the president and the incoming president will also look at that first 100 days as a gauge as to his success and his team's success. But it roughly goes from January 20th, Inauguration Day, all the way through about April 30th, give or take a few days. So a lot is going to happen. I think on day one of the Trump presidency, they're already talking about shock and awe is the word that keeps being used here in Washington. And I think you're going to see a lot of that, of the first couple of days being focused on immigration and border policy, sort of defined, with the exception of inflation in the economy, define this election. I mean, Trump has been running on, ever since he came down the escalator in 2015, 2016, right? It's been about immigration, and it's still about immigration. And so I think you're going to see a lot of border-related executive orders. In fact, I hear they're preparing about 100 executive orders. I don't know if that's on day one, but you're going to see that in the first days of the Trump presidency, a lot of border activity. Two, I think you're going to start to see, and I know we'll get to this in a second, a lot of activity around tariffs. The definition of what they're going to do is to be determined. I think you do see some conflicting reports coming out of the Trump transition right now, but tariffs are coming. But also in that 100-day period, in addition to the executive orders, in addition to potential moves on tariffs, Capitol Hill has to start to move through their process through the various processes. And we still have to finish the FY25 budget. We're in the first month of 25, and that process hasn't been completed. We're operating under a CR. And so that process has to be completed by March 15th. They have to come up with an FY26 budget. And that FY26 budget will be hints on the legislative vehicles they'll be using to pass major pieces of the Trump agenda. So, and of course, we have the debt ceiling expiring. And that happens also in the first quarter. So all this has to be sort of digested by Congress, the incoming Congress. And then they're going to have to figure out how they're going to pass these measures and in what time frame. Remember, and I know JD and I have talked about this, and Julie briefly throughout the election, the Republican majority in the House has shrunk. I believe for the first time in history, the majority in the House is slimmer than the majority in the Senate. Wow. And currently, we're talking about 3 Republican members. One has resigned already. 2 are about to resign to take positions in the Trump administration. And all of a sudden, the current status of this Congress is 220 to 215. Overnight, by January 20th, it will be 217 to 215. Wow. Until early April, when these special elections take place, mainly a couple in Florida. And at that point, the Republican seats, so likely to say Republican, Johnson will have his 220 to 215 seat majority. That's 2 seats, right? He can't afford, there's no margin for error for him. And so I think they're going to be laying the groundwork in February, in March. I think April is going to be the hotbed of activity. Not to say that other things won't happen in the meantime, but April is when everything really will come down and come to fruition.
So, JT, how significant do you think it was that the Republicans, maybe after a little bit of a kerfuffle, were able to elect Mike Johnson as the House leader? With what we went through, I don't know when it was, a year or 2 ago, where it seemed like almost a boxing match, where round 2, round 3, round 9, how significant in your mind is the fact that they were able to pretty quickly come together on that?
Yeah, pretty significant. And that was Johnson's, a lot of Johnson's doing, but also Trump's doing as well. Trump talked to a couple of the members of the Freedom Caucus who are outliers. Initial vote, they kept that vote open for over an hour, which is not unheard of in DC. There's supposed to be 15-minute votes, but this is sort of the way it works on both sides of the aisle. But Trump twisted a couple of arms. I think you'll see it's an early sign of some of the arm twisting that both Trump, Johnson, and incoming majority leader of the Senate, John Thune, will need to deploy in order to get people over the finish line. This is herding cats times 535, if you will. And that's precisely what it's going to take to get. I mean, think about what I just said a minute ago. Debt ceiling, FY25, FY26, and I know we're going to get to this my favorite term, and I say that sarcastically, budget reconciliation. It is going to take a massive effort on Capitol Hill, but it's not insignificant that he did it in an hour or 2 hours. But at the end of the day, that Freedom Caucus is still going to be a fly in the ointment going forward for the next 4 years.
Let's talk about budget reconciliation, because it seems like we can't go a minute without seeing that word somewhere in some article or headline. Could you break that down, talk about the importance of it, maybe explain that a little bit to our listeners, and from your perspective, why is it so important, and what you see as the next steps in that process, JT?
Yeah, Julie, I think that was in my last missive. I talked about get used to the words budget reconciliation.
Yes, you
It's
did mention that.
Yes, it's arcane and it's boring, but simply put, in any budget that's passed, you can write instructions for a process called budget reconciliation. Budget reconciliation is used when you have slim majorities, frankly. And in the House, as we all know from Civics 101, it takes a simple majority to pass a piece of legislation. So 435 members of Congress, 218 gets you over the finish line. A tie does not, by the way, but you have to have plus one to pass legislation in the House. In the Senate, not so simple. You've got the filibuster. Once again, go back to your Civics 101 handbooks, guys. It's 60 votes to get past that filibuster procedural threshold. Budget reconciliation is a budgetary maneuver that's used where you only need 51 votes, frankly. So you just need a simple majority in the Senate to get a piece of legislation passed. So when the Republicans are writing the budget for FY26, in that budget will be in budget reconciliation instructions. So there's going to either be one budget reconciliation package or two budget reconciliation packages. There could be three for that matter, but it has to be written in the FY26 budget. It has to be specific. So first they have to pass the FY26 budget, which will probably happen in February or March. And then in that budget will be instructions for reconciliation. The reason that's important is the bulk of the Trump agenda, the big stuff. I mean, plenty of stuff will be happening for the next 4 years, but tax cuts, energy policy, and of course, border policy, some border policy and border measures will be put in those packages, potentially defense as well. But they'll have to move them. The current debate in early January was all about this one package versus two. And it will be resolved once Republicans kind of figure out how they can make all this happen sooner than later. But remember what I said about 5 minutes ago about the House majority. Now that Trump has been inaugurated and Congress is up and running, Speaker Johnson only has a one-seat majority up until early April. So it's going to be really tough to pass anything, even with 2 seats or 3 seats. When it gets to that in April, it's going to be tough. But that's why I'm saying February and March are really, really important months to lay the groundwork for these packages. And again, I think throughout the first quarter, Congress and the Republicans will determine the easiest and quickest pathway to get these measures passed. I actually think my prediction is, I mean, some people are saying it's going to be this one big, beautiful package because that's where you put all the horse trading in, you rip all the Band-Aids off at once. I actually think it's going to end up being two. I could be wrong here. I think just to get things done quicker and a couple of measures done quicker, they may opt to put a number of things in the first reconciliation package and then save tax cuts for the second reconciliation package. Hope that was clear.
It is. And since you brought up tax cuts, JT, that's kind of where my next question would be is we all know in our industry that we're facing the expiration of the Trump tax cuts on December 31st of this year, 2025. Again, shine up that crystal ball. Where do you think we'll wind up with tax policy?
This is going to be another tall order because I do believe at the end of the day that Trump and the Republicans get most of the renewal of the 2017 tax cuts. They're going to have to tweak it at the end of the day. But right now, the price tag is somewhere between 4 to 4.6 trillion. That's not, guys, it's not including no tax on tips, the Social Security proposals. There are not dozens, but there are a number of proposals that Trump had promised throughout the campaign that push the $10 trillion price tag, 10 trillion with a T. So I don't know that they're going to get all of those in the tax bill, but I do believe the bulk of 2017 will be in there. It is really ambitious to get to a corporate rate of 15%. Frankly, that's going to drive the price tag up. So I think at best they end up at 20. maybe 19. Again, they're going to they're just going to have to turn the dials of every single piece of this legislation, and you've got 2017 tax cuts here, and then you have all these other proposals here. So there's got to be a way to, quote, pay for it all. And looming around this debate is, the Freedom Caucus, who is going to want some pay for, not just for the tax cuts, but for other measures that are being looked at in D.C., including the debt ceiling, which is going to be somewhat problematic for the Republicans getting that passed without Democratic support. So I do believe the bulk of the 2017 tax cuts will get passed. They're going to do, I know a lot of clients are out there are looking at the SALT debate, especially in the Northeast, especially in California, state and local taxes. That's actually was a topic of discussion in Florida with House Republicans and Trump last week. So all these discussions are ongoing. As I may have said in a previous appearance, the Republicans have spent part of 2024 in these little working groups on Capitol Hill in the tax writing committees. So they're prepared for this coming down the pike here in 2025. It's not as if they're going to wake up, new Congress, we're here, what do we do? They've laid a lot of groundwork for what they want to do. The dial turning is going to involve, again, some of the rates from 2017, especially the corporate rate, SALT, and then a lot of the newer tax proposals that Trump threw out there throughout campaign 2024.
JT, I know when we were talking earlier before this recording, you were talking a little bit about a distinction between policy and procedure. Could you share that with our listeners? Because I thought your perspective on that was really interesting. Yeah. And I know I learned a lot from that, and I'm confident that our listeners would as well.
Yeah. And the first half of January, and maybe even the first 2/3 of January, was focused on the one reconciliation bill, 2 reconciliation bills, 1 vehicle, 2, whatever the case. It's all insider baseball, right? At the end of the day, the Republicans will get these measures passed in one way, shape, or form. It might not be the 2017 tax cuts in 2025 might not look precisely as in 2025. They might not look precisely as they did in 2017, but the bulk of them, as I said, will get passed, as will energy measures, as will border measures. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be clean. And you're going to get, really messy. And I think even within Republicans, it's going to get a little ugly at times. But it will get done at the end of the day. So don't focus. We, JD, Julie, JT, the 3 J's here, have to focus on procedure, right? We have to understand procedure, and we have to talk about procedure, because in that, we talk about whether or not tax cuts are going to come with the first half of the year or the second half, or whether or not the debt ceiling is going to get passed in package 1, package 2. Whatever the case, procedure is important. But everyone out there shouldn't get lost on procedure. You should follow procedure. There are guidelines there. There are markers there to watch. But at the end of the day, the policy will come out. It's the sausage making factory again times 535 here in Washington. It's going to be pretty ugly, but policy at the end of the day, it's going to be resolved. And Trump said as much a couple of weeks ago. I don't care about how it gets done; it's going to get done.
But I'm guessing, JT, that our listeners, our financial professionals who are listening, ought to keep in mind that the media is probably going to cover every single one of those little disputes along the way. So if we don't keep our mind above the fray, saying, look, this is just part of the process, at the end of the day, something is going to get done. I think we, or probably more importantly, our clients are going to drive themselves crazy with every little nuance, given the volume of things that you say is going to be coming our way.
You have 2 things working against you. And again, that's why you have to stay calm here. You've got the media, in a sense, just highlighting this. So think about this. For the past 2 years, we thought we were talking about a recession. They were trying, it felt as if the media was talking us into recession. Recession never happened. Same thing here. They're going to get too focused on procedure and these multiple vehicles, multiple packages, and lose sight of the end result, which again I believe will happen. We will get tax cuts. We will get a new energy policy, a more robust energy policy, more deregulatory energy policy, and the same for border policy. Trump will be tweeting 1, 2, 3, 10 times a day. Again, just be calm throughout all of this, and sort of follow our markers as we're laying them out. But just remember, the end game is going to get done. The timing is going to be interesting because of what I said, the makeup of Congress, the Johnson majority. But again, they are front loaded. They do want to get everything done sooner than later, mind you. And you've got an experienced team in Trump 1 versus Trump 2. That's something everyone forgets, is that he's bringing back some of the players from Trump 1 into the Trump administration and the second Trump administration, particularly at an agency called the Office of Management and Budget, another insider baseball agency at the White House. But the gentleman who ran it in 1 is going to run it in 2. These are experienced hands. The Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, who has just been nominated 2 weeks ago by Trump, is probably one of the longest, oldest veterans of tax policy in Washington, D.C., worked on the Ways and Means Committee. So he's got a foot on Capitol Hill. He's going to have a foot in the administration. That's why I'm confident that they'll get a tax package done. So there's the little insider things that you need to watch along the way. You need to look at the timelines that we're trying to lay out for you, but don't get lost in all of the hype.
That makes sense. I think that that's very helpful. Should we shift gears and talk tariffs a bit? And yes, I think our listeners probably would appreciate your perspective on that, and what again, a crystal ball moment here. But what are your thoughts on this, and where do you think we're headed in this area?
And JT, before you start, let me we haven't even talked about this, but recently we held a national webinar. It was kind of our market outlook for the first quarter kind of thing. And one of the survey questions that we asked all the financial advisors who were attending was, what do you think is the single biggest risk to economic prosperity, right? Is it a Fed mistake? Is it inflation? Is it the number one answer? And by a long shot was tariffs and trade war. That was top thing on the mind of the financial professionals who were surveyed in our webinar. So that's just a little preface of how important it is to our listeners. So what are your thoughts? I mean, we've heard everything from Trump just may use them as a threat, but he won't actually do anything. You use it as a negotiation tactic to, no, he's serious and he's going to do it. So where do you think we stand in the balance?
Yeah, I think they're coming. I think they're coming. I think that the debate raging with the Trump transition right now is whether or not, if you're looking at the universal tariffs, right, for example, somewhere between 10 and 20%, I think initially they really have an impact on prices. And I don't think that's something they want to do at the onset. So one approach the new administration is thinking about is looking at universal tariffs, but singling out particular sectors. So you've got the defense industrial supply as one sector, whether it's steel, copper, et cetera, anything in that defense industrial sector. 2, you have the medical supply sector, the critical medical supply sector, syringes, vials, potential pharmaceuticals, and then you also have the energy sector. So in the energy sector, you have batteries, you've got potential solar implications as well. So I think they might look at countries where we've got in these 3 sectors, defense, energy, and some healthcare, and look at whether there's an imbalance or whether we want to reshore them back to the U.S. And I think there will be more targeted there. I think I talked earlier about layered or targeted. I think that's what a lot of the advisors are pushing right now. So there's not this massive jolt to the economy on day one or whenever they're imposed. But be not mistaken, the tariffs are coming, whether it's universal without the sector approach as I laid out, or whether it's tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada. Now, I think from Mexico and Canada, I do think they're strategic right now. I think they're a bargaining tool to get them. If you remember the last time around, there was the potential for a 25% tariff on all Mexican products. And somehow they negotiated, and that never ended up happening. And that was a lot of border policy. Remember, this is going to be border policy, both with our southern border and our northern border, to get them to the table and to get them to move in the direction we want to take them. China is a different animal of itself. And I think that's coming regardless. And I think that likely will be across the board. But to the extent that they can mitigate some of the early price jolts to the economy, and this is the last thing this administration wants, and I think Trump realizes this. The last thing they want is, just as we still have questions about inflation right now, is to invite some tariff policy or trade policy that is going to send prices upward. And that's why the incoming administration, you've got the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick at the Department of Commerce, and then the U.S. Trade Rep. Once these gentlemen are installed in their positions, I think you'll see faster action. But I believe they're the 3 or 4 right now that are trying to move them into a more sector-based approach. There might be countries that have the universal tariff, period, end of story. If there's a massive imbalance, the universal tariff hits. Other countries, it might be that sector approach. Again, they're still figuring it out. And I do think that you're going to see probably in February, which is now about a week away, I think you're going to see some action on tariffs. Again, a lot of this can be done by executive order. Some can be done by Congress. There is another move here in D.C. that to let Trump do some of this unilaterally and then work. You have some air cover if you work with Congress to impose other tariffs. So they're working on it. This is not going to take months, in my opinion. This is going to take weeks and maybe a month or two before they start unleashing these.
Well, JT, thanks again for joining us on the Human Centric Investing podcast. I think, obviously the future is always kind of hard to read in the face of uncertainty, but I'll take your words to heart, and I think our listeners should as well, especially when it comes to interacting with our clients. We should almost expect that as these things kind of wrangle their way through DC, that our clients are going to become pretty anxious about what they're hearing and what's going to happen or what potentially could happen. And I know it's difficult to have those conversations, but to keep the big picture in mind, I think your words about it will get done, not to get too involved in the play-by-play, but almost step back and observe the process. And then once it does get done, now we can talk about longer term ramifications. I think that's really, really wise advice.
Yep. And JD, while all this takes place, and while we're talking tariffs and immigration and tax policy, the deregulatory environment that the administration wants to pursue is going to be unlike anything we've seen. So that is only going to make it a better climate for financials, for energy, for a number of other sectors to have this regulatory burden lessened, diminished, if you will. And that's not even taking into account what the DOGE committee wants to do in the coming months, in the coming years. So
there's almost too many things to watch.
There are.
As I'm saying, this is the fire hose, guys. This deregulatory effort that they're about to undertake, some of these 100 initial executive orders will have a lot of deregulation in it. They want to undo a lot of Biden administration regulation and then not invite more and just create a better environment for certain industries. It helps everything from obviously the bigger companies, onshoring, and also small cap companies who are part of the supply chain. So a lot of time, we could spend a lot of time on deregulation, but that is going to be a huge boon to the economy and to the business climate.
Well, JT, on behalf of all of our listeners, Julie and I just want to thank you again for taking your time. really to kind of give us a little bit of a guide as to what to watch for, especially in these first 100 days, that can really help to guide us for the rest of the year and on through the Trump presidency. So thanks again for taking the time to be with us. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining in for another episode of the Human Centric Investing Podcast.
And for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more, please visit hartfordfunds.com and seek out our Politics Resource Center. There you'll find many white papers written by JT himself.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, JT. Thanks for listening to the Hartford Funds Human Centric Investing Podcast. If you'd like to tune in for more episodes, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube.
And if you'd like to be a guest and share your best ideas for transforming client relationships, email us at guestbooking@hartfordfunds.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Talk to you soon.
Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. Small cap securities can have greater risks, including liquidity risk and volatility than large cap securities. The views and opinions expressed herein are those of the guest, who is not affiliated with Hartford Funds.